I think one of the most surprising things that people have ever learned about me, if they ever run into me like at parties or something, meet me for the first time, um, the one thing that always used to throw people off was that for several years now, up until very recently, I used to use a flip phone instead of a smartphone. And so, obviously, I'm aware that pretty much nobody ever uses any sort of flip phone anymore. But for me, the past several years, I had used one. Um, the reason for it is sort of twofold. One is just the sort of the saving money aspect of it. It was a lot easier. It was a bit cheaper to have a flip phone than just a regular smartphone. That's one thing. But the main reason I had done it was for a completely separate reason. And so when I was in probably my second semester of my MFA, I was at dinner one night with my professors. And so before the dinner, there was a reading by one of the faculty, and they had spoken about the faculty member was a bit older, just for context. They spoke about a friend of theirs that they had known for decades and decades and decades that recently had passed away. And this gentleman was a local writer, and he had his entire life never owned a television. That was part of the story. Was about that was a reflection of the fact that the guy was sort of out of his time, and the fact the guy never had his television. And so at dinner that night, I had sat down. I was sitting next to the faculty member, and I asked them, and I had said, "Hey, do you think that that technology basically distracts writers? That a writer needs to be away from technology in a sense?" And they had concluded that yes, they thought that if you're going to be a strong writer, you needed to have long periods of time isolated from technology. And the reason why is that technology today distracts us. And not just, I mean, not just in the traditional sense of like, people talk about like, the time suck, but the longer you can be alone with your thoughts, the more your writing is going to improve, because writing in and of itself is simply thinking. It's simply pondering a topic. And even when you aren't physically at the desk, having that time isolated from the beeps and the distractions and the sort of digital dementia that's developed nowadays amongst people, that's going to improve your writing when you return to the desk the next day. And the next night, I was at dinner again with different faculty members, and I started noticing that amongst all of the authors that were in the faculty, about half of them used flip phones instead of traditional cell phones. I'm not sure why. I imagine that part of the reason why they use them is simply because it's easier to not get bothered by emails all day. And with traditional cell phones where you're getting emailed from students, from potential like agents and all that stuff all the time. It's my guess is it was as much as not to be bothered. And yet I started noticing though that since they all had flip phones as well, I decided to start doing that. That's in essence why I had done that. It's only nowadays in the past few months when I decided to start filming these videos that I decided to get a smartphone, because it's easier to film that way. It's easier to throw these things up on the web. But yeah, that was the big sort of my big thing for several years. Much to the annoyance of people that knew me that thought it was the stupidest thing in the entire world. But I can tell you, having done that, having actually taken several years of not being distracted, of just sitting alone in waiting rooms, being in my car without my cell phone, being bored in line, waiting places, your thinking definitely improves. Your ability to sort of improve your imagination increases as you are away from those dings and those notifications and all that. And so this video is not to necessarily persuade anyone to go in that direction. But if I was going to give a tip to somebody that was asking, all right, what can I do to improve my writing? I Getting rid of the cell phone, getting rid of the distractions, having long periods of time slated out where you don't get bothered with videos and distractions. That's probably some of the best advice you can get. In all honesty, there was a video by Joyce Carol Oates where she once said that a writer's defeat is not their lack of talent; it's being interrupted. And it's true. Like the longer you can sit in a room and not be bothered, the better your quality of work is going to be. So that's just a quick video, just I guess explain that, but more serving as a sort of request that if you are someone that finds themselves constantly distracted and you notice your writing is not improving, that could be why. It could be a very, very simple solution of just you have the tools to do it. You just haven't the time to sit with your imagination and sort of let your mind wander. Your necessity to not be bored, your fear of being bored overcomes the potential imagination development that comes from just sitting in a seat, at a desk, in a room, and just reflecting on what you're going to write. It's almost funny in a way that we are always rushing to get away from our thoughts. We're always running away from reflecting and pondering. And if you're going to be a writer, it's the opposite. Despite the fact that maybe we have some sort of inclination to sort of rush and be done with our thoughts, be done with reflections. If you're a writer, that's basically your job. I mean, the job of writing is not clacking keys on a keyboard. It's constructing ideas, these sort of ethereal concepts, and making them into a tangible sentence in your head to convey to someone else, and then typing it out. The typing is merely being a scribe. That's merely the final end product of what you're doing. The job of the writing is simply making these ideas in your head. And if you're being constantly distracted, if even away from the desk, even in your off time, if you're being constantly distracted, you're never going to give your mind a chance to play around with ideas, to come up with these different concepts. And so there it is. That's basically the video. I don't suspect anyone will ever actually take up the idea of trading in their smartphone for their flip phone today in kind of the modern age. Maybe someone will, but the greater point of the flip phone is just the idea of being cognizant, being aware, being mindful, and not being as distracted. That's really the point. The flip phone simply makes it easier. When you have a smartphone with limited numbers of apps and all this stuff right at your fingertips, it takes a lot of willpower. It takes a lot more willpower to sort of overcome that need for distraction when you're bored, just sitting around. Having a flip phone just removes that. You don't give yourself the option, basically. So it can be done without, obviously, a flip phone, but the core principle, the core idea is just being mindful, just being okay with being bored and spending long periods of time just really playing with your thoughts, letting your imagination develop.